Joseph Campbell's monomyth, the traditional hero's journey, relies entirely on a cycle of mortal limitation. A protagonist encounters a trial, confronts their own physical or psychological boundaries, and struggles to overcome them. Speculative fiction tests the breaking point of that structure. By introducing protagonists with engineered perfection or omnipotent abilities, the boundary of human limitation is erased entirely. This creates a narrative paradox. When a character possesses absolute power, absolute perfection, or absolute moral corruption, the tension required to sustain a story mathematically vanishes. This formula outlines neuroeconomist Paul Zach's biological baseline for character resonance. Attention plus empathy yields an emotional connection. Triggering that empathy variable requires a psychoanalytic mechanism. Jacques Lacan identified this as the ideal I. The ideal I is the innate human drive to project an unattainable, perfected version of oneself onto an external figure, in this case, a fictional character. But perfection alone is inert. The philosopher Charles Baudelaire observed the necessary counterweight, human duality. Baudelaire noted that humanity possesses simultaneous, competing tendencies towards God, representing perfection, and Satan, representing corruption. Emotional resonance requires evidence of both. To survive the collapse of the traditional monomyth, a character must balance psychoanalytic projection with a rigid structural vulnerability. We see this balance fail completely in the Mary Sue archetype, a term originating in 1973 from amateur Star Trek fanfiction. The archetype is defined by a specific set of variables: effortless conflict resolution, extraordinary physical or intellectual abilities, and universal adoration by the established cast. This illustration demonstrates how the archetype hijacks Lacan's mirror stage. The author uses the character as an unconstrained self-insertion, staring at a hyper-competent reflection of themselves. The Mary Sue fully realizes the ideal I. It achieves the tendency toward perfection, but entirely ignores Baudelaire's requirement for corruption or flaw. Without that structural vulnerability, the empathy equation breaks. The audience perceives this lack of psychological duality as a rejection of reality. The emotional connection is severed. By refusing to constrain the protagonist's perfection, the Mary Sue flatlines the narrative tension and creates an amateurish void. If the Mary Sue fails by ignoring vulnerability, Dr. Manhattan serves as the extreme test case for salvaging a character with absolute power. He controls matter, space, and time. Physical conflict is trivialized when an entity can dissolve a complex atomic structure with a thought. The writers preserve the narrative, not by artificially reducing his omnipotence, but by severing his connection to humanity. This diagram tracks the precise mechanics of that trade-off. As the physical power variable scales toward infinity, the character's capacity for human connection drops to absolute zero. The empathy equation holds for omnipotent characters only if their limitless capability functions as a tragic commentary on isolation, rather than a tool for triumph. When a highly competent character actively rejects traditional goodness, the narrative requires a different architectural blueprint. John Milton's Satan in Paradise Lost serves as the progenitor of the modern dark hero, fusing heroic physicality with absolute despair. This diagram maps Alice Capstick's alternative structural model, designed specifically to replace the monomyth for these characters, the antihero's journey. The first stage is the rise. The character exhibits righteous pride, pursuing an ideological goal against a seemingly oppressive cosmic tyrant. But the nobility of that goal is fatally undermined by the character's methods, which rely heavily on manipulation and counterfeited truth. This leads to the reign phase. The antihero achieves power, only to realize they rely on the exact same tyranny they sought to destroy. The reign is defined by psychological torment. The character consciously chooses the infernal, adopting a facade to obscure their own corruption. That facade triggers the final stage, ruin. The adopted persona permanently degrades the antihero's true identity. This degradation strips the character of all agency. They are locked eternally in the shape in which they sinned. Unlike Campbell's monomyth, there is no triumphant return, and there is no elixir. There is only permanent entrapment. The antihero's journey succeeds because it substitutes external physical conflict with a rigid, inescapable psychological descent. This composite Cartesian plane maps the trajectory of all three archetypes. Subverting the traditional hero demands a mandatory structural trade-off to maintain audience empathy. The Mary Sue ignores the trade-off entirely. It presents unearned perfection, shattering the Lacanian mirror and flatlining the narrative. Dr. Manhattan survives the equation. He trades infinite capability for a total, agonizing divestment of humanity. The satanic antihero internalizes the conflict. It fuses the sublime aesthetic of a hero with a rigid, downward structural degradation. When speculative fiction breaks the bounds of human limitation, it must build a new prison for its characters. That prison is either an emotional void or an inevitable psychological ruin.